She doesn't belong here. Someone put a woman in my spotter slot, and I want to know who authorized that." Those 11 words were said by Captain Derek Ashton on a Tuesday morning in early September 2011, in a briefing room at CFB Petawawa, in front of 23 soldiers who all went quiet in the specific way soldiers go quiet when they know something has just been said that cannot be unsaid. He did not lower his voice when he said it. He did not look at the person he was talking about. He held his clipboard against his chest and looked at the senior warrant officer standing at the back of the room and waited for an answer as if the question were administrative rather than personal, as if the person sitting 3 rows back in the second seat from the left were a scheduling error rather than a human being who could hear him. Staff Sergeant Renata Calloway had been in the Canadian Army for 11 years. She had learned, over the course of those 11 years, to keep her face arranged in a particular expression when moments like this one arrived. Not blank. Blank looked like she was hiding something. Not neutral either. Exactly. Something closer to patient. The expression of someone who has been told, in various ways by various people, that they do not belong in a room, and who has decided that the most powerful response available to her is to remain in the room anyway. She kept her eyes forward. Her hands, which were resting on her notebook, did not move. Warrant Officer Second Class Bernard Kehoe, who was standing at the back of the room and who had been in the Army since before Ashton had finished high school, cleared his throat once. "Sergeant Calloway is attached from the intelligence section, sir. Cross-trained in precision fire, 2 tours in Afghanistan. She's on the roster because she earned the slot." Ashton looked at Kehoe. Then he looked briefly at Calloway. Then he looked back at the front of the room. "Right," he said. "Let's get started." He did not apologize. He moved forward the way men like Ashton move forward, as if what had just happened was a small procedural matter that had been resolved rather than an insult that was still sitting in the air of the room like smoke. Renata exhaled once. She opened her notebook. She had survived worse than Derek Ashton. She had survived considerably worse. But she filed the moment away in the particular place inside herself where she filed things that she expected to become relevant again. Her instinct, as it usually was, turned out to be correct. Renata had grown up in Trenton, Ontario, the kind of town that exists in a specific relationship with the military because 8 Wing is there, and the military is part of the landscape. The same way the river is part of the landscape, present and constant and shaping the lives of everyone near it, whether they are part of it or not. Her father, Chief Warrant Officer Douglas Calloway, had spent 26 years in the Army before retiring with a back injury and a coffee habit he never successfully addressed. Her mother had worked as a civilian analyst on the base for 19 years, reading satellite imagery with the particular focused attention of someone who has learned that what is not visible in a photograph can be as important as what is. Between the two of them, they had raised Renata and her older brother James in a household where precision was not a personality trait. It was a baseline expectation. You said what you meant. You did what you said. You showed up on time and you stayed until the job was done. And if you made a mistake, you identified it clearly and fixed it and moved forward without drama. Sentiment was fine. Sentiment was human, but sentiment was not a substitute for accuracy. By the time she was 12, Renata could read a topographic map faster than most adults she knew. By 14, she had started shooting competitively at the range her father took her to on Saturdays. Not because he told her to, but because she had watched him shoot and understood instinctively that there was something in it for her, something about the relationship between stillness and precision and outcome that connected to the way her mind already worked. She was not the kind of shooter who made it look effortless. She was the kind who made it look like work, because it was work, and she respected the work too much to pretend otherwise. She was also, consistently, the kind who hit the target. She enlisted at 18. She went in through intelligence, which was her mother's background, and which suited the part of her brain that ran constantly, even when she was doing other things. She was fast and thorough and accurate. She was also bored by it, in the specific way of someone operating well below their ceiling, which her supervisors recognized, and which eventually led to conversations about where else her skills might be useful. Applied for sniper course. She was told no. She was told no. She applied again. She was told no differently. She went to her sergeant major and made her case in the way her father had taught her to make cases, with evidence and with composure and without apology. She was accepted on the 3rd attempt, which was not unusual for the program, and she graduated in the top 2 of her class, which was somewhat unusual for anyone. After that, she worked herself into the kind of position that does not get announced. She was attached to rifle platoons on her first Afghanistan tour and then her second. She did her job. She built the kind of reputation that develops quietly, not through a single moment, but through the accumulation of many small moments over time, until the reputation stops being a point of conversation and becomes simply a fact. Until Derek Ashton walked into a briefing room with a clipboard. The first week under Ashton's command, Renata did what she always did when the environment changed. She watched, she assessed, she built a picture. He was competent. That was the honest red, and she gave it honestly because she had no interest in distorting her assessments to fit her preferences. He ran a clean briefing. His planning was methodical. He kept good situational awareness, and he did not waste the unit's time with information that had no operational value. He was, by most metrics she applied to officers, adequate and then some. But he also had a particular habit that she had seen before in men who were otherwise capable. He listened to some people and processed other people. The distinction was subtle. When Monroe spoke, Ashton absorbed it. When Kehoe spoke, Ashton considered it. When Renata spoke, something in his expression shifted into a mode that was not quite dismissal, but was adjacent to it. The mode of a person who has already made a categorical decision about a source and is now only nominally receiving the transmission. She mentioned it to Kehoe one evening when they were doing maintenance checks in the vehicle bay. Not as a complaint, as an observation, the way she might mention that the wind had changed. "He doesn't hear me," she said. "He hears sounds and he assigns them to me, but he doesn't actually hear me." Kehoe kept working on the radio assembly in his hands. He was 61 years old and had the unhurried quality of someone who had stopped being in a hurry about things he couldn't change. He'd heard that, he said. She looked at him sideways. "What do you think it is?" He thought about it, which with Kehoe meant he actually thought about it rather than producing the first available answer. "He's not a bad officer. He'll probably make major, maybe lieutenant colonel if the right file crosses the right desk. But his picture of what a soldier looks like was built a long time ago, and it's load-bearing. Anything that doesn't match the picture doesn't register the same way." She nodded slowly. "That's a generous read." He glanced at her. "I'm known for it." They went back to the work, but she kept thinking about what he'd said, not the part about Ashton, the part about load-bearing pictures. Because she had encountered this her entire career, the mental architecture that some people built early and maintained rigidly, where the category soldier had a specific shape, and she was a shape that did not fit. And rather than update the architecture, people worked around her the same way they'd work around an inconvenient load-bearing wall. They'd acknowledge it was there. They just wouldn't look directly at it. What she could never fully understand, no matter how many times she saw it, was how someone could watch her work and still only see the shape. She filed that too, and she went back to the maintenance check. The patrols through September were the kind of hard that doesn't show up in briefings. Not dramatic, not cinematic. The grinding, cumulative weight of sustained vigilance in terrain that could be used against you in ways you hadn't anticipated yet. Renata had been on enough patrols to understand that the anticipation was the thing, not the events, the preparation for events that might or might not arrive. She was good at the anticipation. She stayed in it more naturally than most people because her mind did not have a reliable mechanism for leaving it. While other soldiers rotated through the small social rituals of the long hours, the jokes, the stories, the low-level noise that kept people human during sustained operations, Renata was always reading the terrain, measuring distances with her eyes, checking wind indicators, running the quiet, ongoing mathematics of someone whose brain treats landscape as a problem to be solved in advance. Private First Class Desmond Okafor, who was 21 years old and had been in country for 3 months, and who had the particular wide-open quality of someone who had not yet learned to be careful about asking questions, fell into step beside her on a patrol in late September and watched her for long enough that she became aware of it. "What are you looking at?" she finally said. "Not a question." He hesitated. "You keep looking at that tree line on the north approach, and then at the ridge line, and then back. What are you calculating?" She considered how much to say. "Elevation differential between those two positions is about 60 meters. Wind out of the northwest at that elevation would create a channeling effect through the low ground we're moving through. Makes it a natural observation corridor for anyone who wants eyes on us without being on the same plane. He looked. There's nothing there? Not right now. He was quiet for a moment. Do you always do that? Do what? Think about what could be there that isn't yet. Someone has to. Another pause. Does it ever stop? When she was home, she said mostly. He thought about that for a few steps. That seems exhausting. It's just math, he said. The exhausting part isn't the math. The exhausting part is that everyone else seems to not be doing it. She looked at him sideways. He was young. He had a directness that was different from impertinence, the directness of someone who was still in the phase of genuine curiosity before the army trained it into something more managed. She said, "That's why you stay in your lane and trust the people in theirs." He nodded slowly, like he was filing it somewhere. They kept walking. She remembered that later. She remembered it because it was the last patrol before everything changed. 8 days before the engagement, Ashton called a briefing that Renata would think about afterward as the moment when the shape of what was coming had already been determined, even if none of them could see it yet. The mission was a route clearance patrol through the southern approach corridor, 12 personnel, pre-dawn start. Intelligence from higher command described elevated traffic patterns in the area over the preceding 72 hours, not specific intelligence, the ambient kind, the kind that said something has changed but we do not yet know what. Renata had read the intelligence summary before the briefing. She had also, on her own time, cross-referenced the pattern data against terrain features and historical movement signatures from the same corridor over the previous 6 weeks. The pattern she found was not general. It had a specific character. The intervals and positions were consistent with a crew-served weapon being moved toward a final position, not definitively, but consistently. She raised her hand during the briefing. Ashton looked at her. "Staff Sergeant Calloway," he said. She always said her own name because Ashton never did. The movement signatures in the intelligence summary from the last 4 days aren't random. The intervals and the bearing changes are consistent with positioning activity. Specifically, this pattern, she pointed at the map overlay, matches pre-positioning for a fire support asset, something being moved to range on this corridor. The room was quiet. Ashton looked at his briefing notes. Higher command assessed elevated activity. "Respectfully, sir, the specific geometry of the activity is more consistent with fire support positioning than with general traffic increases. I'd recommend we identify likely positions along the route and build contingency plans for a crew-served threat." He looked at her for a moment with a particular pause that was not about thinking. He said, "We'll follow standard patrol protocols. Spotter, confirm your equipment status for the brief." Not Staff Sergeant Calloway, not even Calloway. Spotter, the function, the role. Kehoe at the front of the room shifted in his seat in a way that was nearly imperceptible. Renata said, "Equipment is confirmed, sir." She did not argue. She had made the assessment. She had put it on the table. What happened to it was not entirely within her control, but she made a decision in that moment quietly, without announcing it. She was going to be ready. The night before the patrol, she sat alone in the equipment bay and ran the mathematics one more time, not because she needed to, because doing it was the last honest thing inside a situation where very much was already outside her control. She thought about the corridor. She thought about the ridgelines on both sides. She thought about wind direction at that elevation in the early morning hours, which she had tracked for 5 consecutive days in her notebook and which had been consistent. A northwesterly drift with a slight diurnal variation she had already calculated and internalized. She thought about what Kehoe had said, the load-bearing picture. She had spent her career being the shape that didn't fit someone's load-bearing picture, and she had long since stopped expecting the picture to change to accommodate her. What she had done instead was become so precisely, undeniably good at what she did, that the picture's failure to accommodate her became the picture's problem rather than hers. She checked her rifle. Every component, every adjustment, every seal. She did it the way she always did, completely, without assumption, without leaving anything to luck. Then she sat in the quiet of the equipment bay and did the thing she did not often do. She closed her eyes and sat in the specific space between stillness and intention. She did not pray. She was not a person who prayed in any conventional sense. But she asked, in whatever language that kind of asking uses, for clarity, not for safety, not for a particular outcome, for the ability to see what was actually there. Then she picked up her rifle and went to get ready for the morning. The morning of the patrol came the way bad mornings always come. Quietly, without announcement, looking exactly like any other morning. Renata was already dressed and running her calculations When the assembly call came through, she had been awake for 40 minutes. Ashton ran the pre-patrol briefing quickly. Eyes only, he said. Observe and report. No engagement unless we are engaged first. Kehoe asked about protocol if they identified an active fire position. Observe and report, Sergeant Major, Ashton said. Extract if we take contact. Kehoe nodded once in the way that meant he disagreed but had decided this was not the moment to press it. Renata recognized the nod. She had seen it before. She knew what it meant. She looked down at her own notes. The movement signatures she had flagged 48 hours earlier were still there, still consistent with the same read, still unaddressed in any official planning document she had seen. She said nothing more. She picked up her rifle and followed the unit into the pre-dawn dark. The walk to the corridor took 90 minutes. Renata spent most of it the way she always spent movement. The wind that morning was slightly lighter than her projection. She noted it, adjusted, continued the running calculation without breaking stride, the way a person maintains awareness of several things simultaneously without giving any one of them their full attention. Okafor fell into step beside her at the 40-minute mark. He did not say anything at first. He had learned that walking near her required no conversation. After a while, he said quietly, "You still think there's something positioned in that corridor?" "I think the data says there is," she said. He was quiet for 2 steps. "What if there isn't? Then nothing happens and I've done math for no reason. And if there is?" "Then we're walking toward it," she said, "and I'm the only person in this unit who's done the calculations." He did not say anything after that. They kept walking. 45 minutes later, they reached the overwatch position on the North Ridge. Renata moved to her assigned position, settled into it with the efficiency of someone whose body knows before the conscious mind does exactly where each point of contact needs to be, and put her eye to the scope. The corridor below was not empty. She saw it immediately, not a casual look, a specific look, the look she had been running in her head for 8 days, confirmed. The disturbed earth at the south approach bend, the geometry of it, the way it sat relative to the road and the natural cover on both sides. She keyed her radio. "Spotter to lead element. I have a position of interest at the south bend, bearing 185. Request authority to observe and assess." Ashton's voice came back. "Confirm standard observation posture only, sir. The ground disturbance pattern at bearing 185 is consistent with a fire support position in preparation. I can see movement. At least 2 personnel. A pause. Maintain observation only, spotter." She kept her eye on the scope. They weren't hiding particularly well now. They had been careful on the way in, but they had arrived and they were working. And when people were working, they stopped being careful. She could see the tube angle. She could see the base plate contact point. She could see one of the 2 figures directing the other with the specific economy of movement that belonged to someone who had done this before and knew how long they had. She keyed her radio. "Lead element, the position is active. 2 personnel. They have a mortar tube and they are in preparation phase. They will be operational in approximately 4 to 6 minutes." A longer pause. "Can you confirm the tube type?" 60 millimeters, she said, based on tube length and profile, sir. We need a decision in the next 3 minutes. Higher needs to advise, Ashton said. Maintain observation. From 3 positions to her left, Kehoe's voice came onto the net. "How long for Higher to respond, sir?" "However long it takes, Sergeant Major." "Sir, if that tube goes operational before we have guidance, this corridor is the primary target." "We are the primary target. Hold your positions, Sergeant Major." "That is direct." The net went quiet. Renata kept her eye on the scope. The second figure had moved to the base of the tube. The first figure, who had been directing operations from a position 3 meters to the left, had stopped moving and was looking at the northern ridgeline. Not directly at her position, in the direction of her position, the directional awareness of someone who had placed a weapon and was now thinking about what might be looking back. She keyed her radio on the secondary channel. "Kehoe," he said, "I see it. If Higher doesn't respond in 60 seconds, I know." The secondary channel went quiet. On the command net, she could hear Ashton transmitting to Higher, the one-sided rhythm of someone waiting for acknowledgement. 40 seconds passed. On the scope, the first figure stopped looking at the ridge and spoke to the second figure. The second figure reached for a round. Renata's finger moved to the trigger guard. On the guard. Ready but not committed. The position that existed in the space between decision and action. She measured her breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The still point at the bottom of the exhale. That was where the shot lived if the shot was going to happen. That was the physics of it. That was the whole of it, in the end. Physics and preparation and the space between heartbeats. On the command net, Ashton came back. Hire is reviewing. Maintain ob. Kehoe's voice cut in, very flat, very precise. Sir, they are loading around. I can see it from my position. If we absorb the first shot on an exposed ridgeline with a 60mm at this range, we will have casualties. The first round will not be ranging. We do not have cover. Silence. 3 seconds of silence that felt like something larger. Then Ashton said, Spotter. She was already on the scope. The second figure had the round at the tube opening. Spotter. What is your confidence level on the primary target? She took one breath. High, she said, bearing 185. Distance 760 meters. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. Ashton said, in a voice that had changed, in a way she would think about. Later, the way voices change. When a person has just encountered the edge of what they thought they knew, can you make that shot? She assessed the wind. She ran the drop calculation. She found the first figure in her scope. He was standing to the left of the tube, arms at his sides, watching the figure at the breach. Yes, she said. One word. No qualification, no hedging. Because she had been doing this mathematics for 8 days and the answer had not changed, Ashton said, take the shot. The net went silent. Renata moved her finger from the guard to the trigger. She found her target. He did not know she was there. He did not know that 760 meters away, on a ridgeline he had assessed as out of effective range, someone was running the last calculation. She exhaled. She found the still point. She squeezed. The rifle fired. Then there was nothing. The aftersound of a shot swallowed by open air and the particular stillness that follows something irrevocable. 760 meters. At that distance, the flight time is less than a second. But less than a second in that moment was long enough to feel the complete weight of 8 days of mathematics, either being right or not. The figure dropped. The second figure stood up from the tube, looked down, looked at the ridge. Ran on the command net, Kehoe, target down. Secondary is moving south. They are leaving the tube. Okafor on an open channel. Did you, Sergeant? I saw it. Okafor. Kehoe said, get off the net. Renata kept her eye on the scope. She tracked the fleeing figure until he was out of any question of effective range and still accelerating. She did a slow sweep of the approach corridor below. One pass, then another. No additional personnel. No secondary position she had missed. She pulled back from the scope. Her hands were steady. Her breathing had returned to its resting rate. She noted this the way she noted everything, observationally, without editorial. Kehoe appeared beside her. He had moved from his position. In the time it had taken her to do the valley sweep, he looked at her for a moment. 760, he said. 760, she confirmed. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, I've been in this army for 31 years. He paused. That was something I will not see again. She looked out at the corridor. On the command net, Ashton was transmitting his after-action report to Hire. She could hear him describing what had happened cleanly and professionally in the cadenced voice of an officer making a contact report. He did not say her name. She noticed. She filed it. The patrol extracted 22 minutes later. The walk back was different from the walk in. Same weight physically. Different weight in every other sense. The particular texture of people who have survived something they understood could have resolved differently. Okafor walked behind her on the descent. He was quiet for the first quarter of the way. When he did speak, his voice was different from the voice he used for questions. Staff Sergeant Calloway, he said. She didn't turn around. What? I don't know how to say what I want to say. Then don't, she said. A pause. He said, is that really something you can do? That distance in those conditions with the clock running. She kept walking. It's something I could do because I spent 8 days making sure I could. He was quiet. Then, what if you'd been wrong? About the position, about the threat? She said, I wasn't. No. But what if? She thought about it honestly. Then 12 people come home anyway, and I've done math for no reason, she said. That's not the worst outcome. The worst outcome is the other direction. He walked in silence for a few steps. I trust you, he said, and then immediately, sorry, that's a strange thing to say. No, she said, it isn't. She did not say anything more on the subject, but she filed it in a different place than the other things she filed. Not the place where things waited to become relevant. Somewhere closer, they came back through the perimeter an hour and 40 minutes after they had left it. Renata cleared her weapon. At the designated point, she signed in. She walked to the equipment bay and began the breakdown. She had been at it for 6 minutes when Ashton came in. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he came in and stood at the distance he seemed to prefer not close, not removed. The specific intermediate distance of someone who has calibrated something. Sergeant Calloway, he said. She looked up from the rifle. She kept her hands on the component she was cleaning. He looked at her the way she had not seen him look at her before. Not the calculating look, not the categorizing look. The look of someone who has been standing next to a door his whole life and has just realized it was not a wall. The shot, he said. 760 meters. He stopped. He seemed to be working through something he had not finished working through yet. She waited. She had learned that waiting was often the most accurate thing she could do in a situation like this one. He said, that was the right call. And he said, I want to say that clearly. It was the right call, the right shot, and I gave the authorization too late. She looked at him steadily. He said, the intelligence assessment from 8 days ago, the movement pattern you flagged, it was correct. Yes, sir, it was. He was quiet. She said, I'm not raising that to be right. I'm raising it so that the next time a pattern like that comes in, it gets looked at differently. A long pause. He said, it will. And then I owe you an apology, Sergeant Calloway, not for today. Today was a failure of process that I own, but for September. For the first briefing, she kept her eyes on him. She had a long list of things she could have said, things that were true and complete, things she had been carrying since that Tuesday morning in early September when 11 words had been said in a room full of people who went quiet. She said, don't do it again, he nodded. He said, yes, Sergeant, and the rank landed differently than it had in any previous sentence he had used it in. He left. She went back to the rifle. She finished the breakdown. She cleaned every component completely, methodically, without leaving anything to chance. Then she sat in the quiet of the equipment bay and let the day settle. 12 people, a tube with a round at the breech, 760 meters, 12 people walking back through that perimeter. She sat with that for a long time. Outside, she could hear the bass, finding its ordinary rhythm again. She picked up her notebook and opened it to the page with the corridor calculations, the wind data, the drop numbers, the bearing, the numbers that 8 days ago had been called elevated general activity, the numbers that this morning had been the difference between 12 people going home and 12 people not. She closed the notebook. She did not write anything more. The math had said what it needed to say. For the first time in 8 days, she felt something that was not calculation, not readiness, not the managed alertness of someone who has been waiting for something to arrive. She felt relief, plain, human, uncomplicated relief, the kind that only comes when you have been carrying something for a long time, and it has finally been set down. She sat with it until it faded into the ordinary sounds of the evening. Then she got up, put the rifle back together, and went to find something to eat. Kehoe found her in the dining facility 20 minutes later. He set his tray down across from her without asking, which was Kehoe's way. They ate for a few minutes without talking. He said, eventually the after-action report is being written. She said, I know. He said, Ashton's been in the operations room for an hour and a half. She ate. He said, Warrant Ferretti went in to contribute observations from the secondary position. Ashton told him he had it covered. She set her fork down. How long is the report? Ferretti heard him say he was on page 4. She nodded. Kehoe looked at her. He said, don't assume the worst. She said, noted. He said, that word has a lot of room in it. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the specific expression that in Kehoe's face meant something was both slightly serious and also slightly unfortunate. He said, good night, Sergeant Calloway. And he stood up with his tray and left. She stared at the wall in front of her for a moment. Then she picked up her fork and finished eating. In the morning, she found out from Okafor. He came to find her at the range at 06:15. He stood in front of her with the expression of someone who has decided that honesty is what the moment requires and is working up to it. He said, I heard something this morning from the operations section clerk. You need to hear it before it gets around. She put down her rifle. She looked at him. He said, the report that went to battalion this morning, Ashton's report, it's 9 pages. Warrant Ferretti's read of the report's summary says you are referenced as the spotter throughout. He paused. No name, not once, just the spotter. She was very still. He said, Colonel Nakamura reviewed it with the Ops NCO this morning and pulled the radio transcripts alongside it. The transcripts are automatically logged, time-stamped. She said, what did she find? He said, the transcript has Ashton saying, Sergeant Calloway, take the shot, on record. Then in 9 pages of report describing the engagement, the spotter appears 11 times and the name Renata Calloway appears 0 times. Nakamura called him in at 0800. He looked at her steadily. I heard it from the hallway, he said. I want you to hear exactly what she said. She said, Captain Ashton, this report refers to the spotter 11 times and does not contain the name Renata Calloway once. The radio log says otherwise. Explain to me what the difference is between those two documents. Renata stood at the firing line. The morning air was cold. The range was empty except for the two of them. 11 times, she said, mostly to herself. He said she told him the report would be amended. She said when a soldier does something that changes the outcome of a patrol, her name goes into the permanent record. She used those exact words. Something moved through Renata's chest that she did not immediately have a precise name for. Not anger. She had managed the anger during the night, and it had settled into something quieter. The thing anger becomes when you have lived inside it, long enough to understand it, without letting it govern you. Not vindication exactly. She had been in the army long enough to know that one correction did not correct a pattern. What she felt was closer to being seen, not celebrated, not awarded. Seen. Someone had looked at the document and said the name belongs in it. That was the whole of it. And it was standing there at the firing line in the early morning cold, more than she had let herself expect. Thank you, she said. He nodded. He went back toward the operations section. She picked up her rifle. She stood at the line. She breathed. She shot. The corrected report reached Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura's desk that afternoon. She read it twice. Then she called in Ashton, Kehoe, and Calloway. The meeting lasted 38 minutes. Nakamura ran it directly and without ceremony. She asked Kehoe to walk through the patrol timeline. She asked Ashton for his decision sequence. She asked Renata to describe the shot. Renata described it the way she described everything. The 8 days of calculation, the movement pattern, the wind data collected at 0600 for 5 consecutive mornings, the specific numbers, drop, drift, bearing, the decision point, the moment between heartbeats. Nakamura listened without interrupting. When Renata finished, she was quiet for a moment. She said, the published effective range for your rifle in that configuration is 400 meters for a precision engagement. Yes, ma'am. You engaged at 760. Yes, ma'am. There's no doctrine that describes what you did. Renata said, the physics describes it, ma'am. The doctrine hasn't caught up. Nakamura looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, the small, precise shift of a person who has understood something exactly. She said, I'm recommending a meritorious service medal. The citation will reflect the intelligence assessment from 8 days prior and the engagement, both of them. Renata said, thank you, ma'am. Nakamura said, the corrected report is the permanent record. Your name, your rank, your analysis, your shot. She paused. That is not a courtesy. It is a correction of an error that should not have occurred. Do you understand the difference? Yes, ma'am. Nakamura looked at Ashton for a moment, then back at all of them. The intelligence assessment from 8 days ago was accurate, and it was not acted on correctly. I want to ensure that future assessments from this unit go through a process that doesn't lose that kind of signal. She was looking at Ashton when she finished saying it. Ashton said, understood, ma'am. Dismissed, she said. In the corridor outside, Kehoe waited until the door had closed. Then he looked at Renata and said very quietly, your name in the permanent record. She said, my name in the permanent record. He said, how does that feel? She thought about it. Like it should have been there from the first draft, she said. He nodded. Yeah, he said, it should have. They walked together down the corridor and out into the afternoon. And the light was that particular late afternoon light that comes after a long day, low and clear and slightly too bright for the eyes. She called her mother that night. She had not planned to. She had planned to file it, process it on her own time, tell her parents when she was home. But she sat on her cot in the quiet of her quarters and thought about what Kehoe had said, and thought about a Tuesday morning in September when 11 words had been said, and she had held her face in the patient expression and kept her hand still on her knees. And she picked up the phone. Her mother answered on the second ring. Her voice had the quality it always had in these calls, alert and careful and controlled in the way of someone who has learned exactly how much steadiness to bring to a phone call from a deployed soldier. Renata said, I made a shot 4 days ago that I want to tell you about. She told her, 760 meters, the corridor, the mathematics, 8 days of preparation, 12 people. Her mother was quiet for a long time after. She said, you've been carrying this for 4 days. Renata said there was a lot of administrative follow-up. Her mother said, Renata, I know, she said. I know. I should have called sooner. Her mother said, your father is going to want to hear every number. He's going to make you walk through the wind calculation twice. Renata said, I know. Her mother said, I am so proud of you. I have always been proud of you. But right now, what I am feeling does not fit inside those words, and I want you to know that. Renata sat in the quiet of her quarters and felt something that had been held in a specific position for 8 days shift and settle, something that she had not let herself feel fully because there had not been space for it, and she had not allowed herself to make space. I know, she said. I feel it too. Her mother said, come home safe, I will. I love you. I love you too. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long moment after the call ended. Then she set it down, and for the first time since the morning it happened, she let herself feel the full, unmanaged weight of what had occurred. 12 people, a single calculation, the still point at the bottom of an exhale. She sat with it until it became ordinary. Then she lay down, and for the first time in 9 days, she slept without running numbers. The citation came through on a November morning, 3 weeks after the patrol. No ceremony. It arrived processed through the administrative section, the way paperwork arrives, placed in a stack, signed for, passed along. Kehoe told her first. He came to find her in the operations section and sat down across from her and said simply, it came through. She said, okay. He watched her for a moment, that's all. She set down her pen. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. It matters, she said, more than I'm making it look. But the thing it's recognizing happened 22 days ago, and I've been doing the job every day since. The job didn't pause for the paperwork. She looked at him. It matters, Bernard. I just don't know yet how to be in the same moment with it. It was the first time she had used his first name on a deployment. He noticed. He did not mention it. He said, your mother should hear about this before the formal presentation. She said, I already told her. He looked at her. He said, good. He stood up. He went back to his desk. She watched him for a moment, then went back to the intelligence package in front of her. There were new movement signatures in the data, new patterns that needed reading. Nobody else in the room was going to read them the way she would read them, so she read them. That was how it was. The citation came, and the mathematics continued, and the job was the same job it had always been, which was the job of paying attention when other people had decided that paying attention was someone else's problem. She was not someone who had ever decided that. She was not built that way. She had been built by a father who stood behind her on a shooting range in Trenton and said again, and by a mother who read satellite imagery with the particular attention of someone who knew what the absence of information meant, to stay in it. To stay in the mathematics even when the mathematics was inconvenient, even when it was dismissed, even when it was filed under elevated general activity and handed back to her with the implicit instruction to stop being so specific. She stayed in it. Years later, she was at her kitchen table in Ottawa on a Saturday morning when her phone rang with a number she did not recognize. She almost did not pick up. She picked up. The voice on the other end was young and deliberate. My name is Priya Singh, it said. I'm a master corporal at CFB Gagetown. I'm in the sniper detachment. I found the citation from the Petawawa Patrol, the corrected one. It got posted in a forum and I tracked down Warrant Kehoe and he gave me your number. Renata said, Kehoe. Yes, ma'am. She made a mental note. She also made a mental note that she would not actually follow through on it. What do you want to know, she said. The voice said, everything. And the word came out with the unguarded directness of someone who meant it completely and did not know yet how long everything actually was. Renata sat at her kitchen table. She looked across the room at the framed citation. Her father had hung beside the kitchen window because he had decided the hallway was too far from where people actually spent time, and she had not argued with him about it, and he had been right. She looked at her name in it. All the places her name appeared in the corrected document, highlighted in yellow by her father with the same precision he brought to everything. So you can find every place it belongs, he had said. And she had not trusted herself to answer him at the time. She pulled a notepad toward her. She picked up a pen. Start with the math, she said. Everything else comes from the math. Most people want to start somewhere else. That's the first thing you need to unlearn. A pause on the other end. Then, okay, tell me the math. And she did.